The sun dipped low over the quiet American town, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Jake Miller, 28 years old, leaned against the hood of an old Chevy in his garage, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The small shop smelled of motor oil, rust, and dreams he could barely afford to keep alive. Life had dealt him a hard hand. He often worked past midnight just to cover rent, and more. Nights than he cared to admit, he went home hungry, saving what little money he had for the shop's bills. Despite his hardships, Jake found a kind of peace in the hum of engines. Cars didn't lie, didn't betray, didn't judge. They just broke down, waited for hands like his, and came alive again. That rhythm had kept him going all these years. Yet on that particular afternoon, something different was waiting for him. He heard the faint squeak of wheels outside his garage, softer than the growl of cars, almost fragile. Turning his head, Jake noticed a girl rolling in slowly, her little hands gripping the wheels of her chair. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her small figure, delicate yet full of quiet determination, strapped behind her chair, was a broken-down toy car. An electric one with faded red paint and missing decals, the kind children rode proudly until time wore them down. The sight of it tugged at something deep inside Jake. The girl's brown hair was tucked behind her ears, and her shy, uncertain eyes lifted to meet his. "Sir," she said softly, "can you fix my dream car?" Jake wiped his hands nervously on his rag, suddenly aware of the grease smudges marking his clothes and skin. This wasn't the usual customer asking about an alternator or brake pads. His chest tightened as he walked closer, lowering himself to meet her eye level. "Your dream car," he repeated gently. She nodded and touched the cracked hood of the toy vehicle behind her. "Yes, my mom gave it to me before she left for a business trip, but now it doesn't work anymore." Her voice trembled, balancing hope with fear. The mechanic studied the little car, noticing the frayed wires, the rusting battery contacts, the cracked plastic frame. It had been loved, deeply loved. He could see the wear of countless adventures in every scratch, every dent. Jake felt his throat tighten. He knew what it was like to hold onto something because it was more than just an object. For this girl, it wasn't just a toy. It was a memory, a connection to someone who mattered. He swallowed hard, blinking away the heaviness rising in his chest. "Don't worry, kiddo," Jake finally said, forcing a reassuring smile onto his tired face. "I'll bring it back to life." The girl's lips curled into the faintest smile. Relief flickering in her eyes. She didn't need to know that Jake had no parts in stock for something like this. She didn't need to know that he'd probably spend his own money, what little he had, just to make it work. All she needed was someone to care enough to try, and Jake Miller, poor as he was, couldn't turn away from her. He wheeled the small car into the garage and carefully placed it on his workbench. The girl stayed nearby, her chair parked in the corner, watching intently. There was something about her gaze. It wasn't just curiosity. It was trust. She trusted him completely, as if she already believed he was capable of miracles. The weight of that trust settled on his shoulders like armor. Jake picked up his tools and began, every turn of the screwdriver and every spark of the soldering iron, driven by more than routine. It was driven by purpose. Hours passed quietly, the girl's soft humming filling the background while Jake worked. He replaced old batteries, carefully soldered new wires where the connections had frayed, and sanded away the corrosion that had eaten at the little car's heart. At one point, he glanced at the girl and saw her eyes drooping with fatigue, yet she refused to leave, clutching the wheels of her chair tightly, as if afraid the dream would slip away if she looked away too long. Jake's hands moved faster, determined not to disappoint her. As the final pieces came together, Jake stepped back, brushing sweat from his brow. The once dull, broken vehicle now gleamed under the dim fluorescent lights of the shop. He had even taken the time to repaint the scratches, polishing the surface until it shone like new. The small details, the chrome stickers he found in an old box, the freshly cleaned wheels were his gift to her. He didn't have much to give in life, but he could give her this moment. Slowly, he pushed the car down to the floor and turned to her. "Want to give it a try?" he asked with a smile that hid his nervousness. The girl's eyes widened, disbelief etched across her face. With trembling hands, she guided her chair forward, reached for the controls of the little car, and pressed the button. The engine hummed to life. Her laughter burst out bright and full of wonder, echoing across the dusty garage. She climbed carefully into the seat, her wheelchair set aside, and the car rolled forward smoothly. Round and round she went, the toy vehicle gliding as though reborn. Jake leaned back against his workbench, watching in silence. It wasn't the kind of joy you measured in money. It was something purer, deeper, a joy that filled the cracks in his tired heart. Every giggle, every sparkle in her eyes was worth more than any paycheck he had ever earned. For the first time in weeks, Jake forgot about overdue bills, the empty fridge at home, the notice from his landlord taped to his door. All that mattered was the little girl who had come to him with broken hope and was now leaving with her dream alive again. The girl circled back to him, breathless and radiant. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She threw her small arms around him in a sudden hug, surprising him. For a moment, Jake stood frozen, then gently patted her back, a lump forming in his throat. No one had hugged him in a long time, not like this, innocent, grateful, unconditional. He felt something shift inside, a quiet reminder of why he had chosen this path, why he endured the hardships of his small, failing garage. When the girl finally settled back into her chair, she gazed up at him with tearful eyes. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." Jake crouched down once more, looking her in the eyes. "I think I do," he replied, softly. He wanted to ask more about her mom, about her life, but he held back. It wasn't his place to pry. What mattered was the light he had brought back into her world. Sometimes fixing a car meant fixing something much bigger than wheels and wires. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the garage glowed under the hum of its single flickering light. Jake walked the girl outside, helping her secure the toy car to the back of her wheelchair once again. She waved at him, her face glowing with gratitude as she rolled down the street, the little vehicle trailing faithfully behind her. Jake stood at the doorway, watching until she disappeared into the distance. The night air was cool, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt at peace. When he finally locked up the shop and turned off the lights, the silence felt less heavy. His stomach still growled with hunger, and the bills would still wait for him tomorrow. But tonight, his heart was full. He lay in bed later, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment, and found himself smiling. The world might have forgotten about people like him, but that little girl had reminded him of something. Priceless, that kindness, no matter how small, could make someone's world whole again. The morning sun had barely risen when Jake unlocked the doors to his small garage. The world was quiet, the streets nearly empty, except for the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel. Inside, he switched on the buzzing fluorescent lights, the familiar hum echoing through the space. Yet his mind wasn't on the cars, waiting for repairs. It was on Lily. He could still see her laughter filling the garage, still feel her small arms wrapped around him in gratitude. That memory lingered like a warmth he hadn't felt in years, softening the edges of his weary heart. As Jake swept the floor and organized his tools, he replayed the previous evening over and over. He thought about the way Lily's face had lit up when the little electric car came back to life. He thought about her eyes shining with gratitude, as if he had given her the world. For him, it had been nothing but a few hours of work, some scraps of paint and wires. Yet for her, it had clearly been something so much greater. He smiled faintly to himself, unaware that fate was already preparing a twist he couldn't imagine. Just as Jake was about to roll up his sleeves and get to work on an old pickup truck, a low rumble drew his attention. The sound was different, powerful, commanding. He stepped outside and froze. A long black limousine glided slowly to a stop in front of his garage, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. The contrast between the luxury vehicle and the cracked pavement outside his humble shop was almost surreal. Jake blinked, wondering if he was dreaming. People like him didn't cross paths with cars like that, let alone the people inside them. The driver stepped out first, a sharply dressed man in a dark suit who moved quickly to open the rear door. From inside emerged a tall, elegant woman, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She was poised, confident, every step radiating authority and grace. Her tailored designer suit, pearl earrings, and carefully styled hair spoke of wealth and influence. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he recognized her face from magazines and news reports. This wasn't just anyone, it was Victoria Hayes, a billionaire businesswoman whose name carried weight across the country. What was she doing at his rundown shop? For a moment, Jake wondered if he should say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Victoria's sharp eyes swept the surroundings, her expression unreadable until they finally settled on him. To Jake's surprise, the hardened look softened instantly. Her lips curved faintly into a smile as she walked closer, her driver maintaining a respectful distance. "You're the man who fixed my daughter's car?" she asked, her voice calm, yet carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Jake stood frozen, his rag still in hand, grease smeared across his shirt. His heart pounded as he finally found his voice. "Yes, ma'am," he said cautiously, his tone respectful. She seemed really happy with it. "I just wanted to help." He shifted, uncomfortably under her gaze, aware of how out of place he must have looked compared to her world of elegance and power. Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him as though he was some puzzle she couldn't quite solve. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. "I returned late last night from an international trip," she explained. "Lily wouldn't stop talking about you, about the kind mechanic who gave her back her dream car." Her eyes softened further as she spoke her daughter's name. Jake swallowed, unsure how to respond. Compliments like that didn't often come his way. He glanced at the limousine behind her, its glossy exterior reflecting the morning light, then back at the woman. Before him, she looked like she belonged to another universe, one he would never step into. And yet here she was, standing in front of his garage, speaking to him as if they were equals. "She's a sweet kid," Jake finally managed, his voice low but sincere. "It wasn't much, really. Just a little work and a few parts. I was glad I could do it for her." Victoria's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes holding his in a way that felt almost disarming. "Do you know how rare it is to find someone who helps without expecting anything in return?" she asked softly. Her words hung in the air, striking a chord deep inside Jake. He shifted uneasily, unused to such praise. He had spent his life overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. People rarely noticed the sacrifices he made, the nights he went, hungry just to keep the garage lights on. To hear someone like her speak those words, it felt strange, almost unreal. "You gave my daughter more joy than money ever could," Victoria continued, her tone filled with quiet conviction. Jake lowered his eyes, embarrassed by the weight of her gratitude. He had never done it for recognition. He had simply seen a little girl who needed kindness, and he couldn't turn her away. "She reminded me of—" He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "She reminded me of myself when I was a kid. Sometimes all you need is someone to care." His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying the emotions he usually kept hidden beneath layers of silence and work. Victoria studied him closely, as if trying to see past the grease-stained clothes and tired eyes into the man beneath. She saw humility, but also strength, a quiet dignity that couldn't be bought. She folded her arms lightly, her expression thoughtful. For a woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals, this moment felt different. Here stood a man who had nothing, yet had given her daughter something priceless. "People like you," she said at last, "are the reason my daughter still believes in kindness." Her words were not just a compliment, they were a statement of truth, one that carried unexpected weight. Jake felt his throat tighten, his hands fidgeting with the rag in his grip. Compliments never sat well with him. They reminded him of how invisible he usually was to the world. He forced a weak chuckle. "I didn't think fixing a toy car would make such a difference," he admitted. "Honestly, I was just glad to see her smile." Victoria's expression softened even more. "That smile meant everything," she said simply. For a moment, the distance between billionaire and mechanic seemed to vanish, leaving only two people bound by a little girl's joy. It was a strange, humbling connection. The driver shifted slightly, glancing at his watch, but Victoria didn't move. She wasn't done here. She took a small step closer, lowering her voice as though speaking more personally now. "You must think it's strange, me coming here like this," she said. Jake nodded faintly, admitting, "A little. Yeah, I don't get many visitors in limousines." His attempt at humor drew the faintest laugh from her, surprising him. The sound was softer than he expected, almost humanizing her in a way that the newspapers never had. For a second, Jake saw not a billionaire, but simply a mother. "I had to see for myself," Victoria explained, her tone firm yet warm. "Lily spoke of you as if you were some kind of hero. I wanted to meet the man who gave her that happiness." Jake's eyes widened, slightly caught off guard by the weight of her words. A hero? He had never thought of himself that way. He was just a mechanic, a poor one at that, barely keeping his life together. Yet standing in front of this powerful woman, hearing her speak those words, he felt something stir inside him, an unfamiliar sense of worth. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the waking town. Jake shifted his weight, unsure what to say next. Victoria finally broke the quiet, her voice gentle yet certain. "You may think what you did was small," she said, "but to my daughter, it was everything. And to me, that matters more than you know." Jake lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes fully for the first time. In them, he saw not just wealth or power, but sincerity. And in that instant, he realized that this meeting was only the beginning. The following morning, Jake woke up with a heaviness in his chest, unsure whether yesterday's encounter with Victoria Hayes had been a dream or reality. He sat at the edge of his worn-out mattress, staring at the cracked walls of his small apartment. Her invitation, replayed in his mind over and over, "Come to my mansion tomorrow." He rubbed his tired eyes, wondering what on earth a man like him would even say in a place like that. He didn't own a suit. His shoes were scuffed, and his best shirt was still stained with grease. Still, something inside pushed him to try. He cleaned himself as best he could, brushed his hair neatly, and slipped on his cleanest pair of jeans and an old button-down shirt. The drive out of town felt surreal. The farther he went, the more the scenery changed from cracked sidewalks and old diners to manicured lawns, high gates and sprawling estates. Finally, Jake stopped in front of towering iron gates adorned with golden accents. His truck looked painfully out of place, a relic parked among polished driveways, where luxury cars gleamed like jewels. And then, just as he was about to lose his nerve, he saw her Lily. She sat at the gate in her wheelchair, waving both hands excitedly, her laughter carrying across the air. At that moment, Jake's doubts faded. Whatever waited inside, he was here for her. He climbed out of his truck, his lips pulling into an involuntary smile as she shouted, "You came!" The guard pressed a button and the gates opened slowly, grandly, as if welcoming him into another world. Jake walked beside Lily as she led him up the long, winding driveway toward the mansion. The house itself looked like something out of a magazine, massive pillars rising toward the sky. Wide marble steps leading to ornate double doors, windows sparkling with reflections of the morning sun. Jake hesitated, his boots squeaking faintly against the polished stone, feeling more out of place with every step. But Lily reached out, gripping his hand in her small one. "Don't be scared," she whispered with a grin. "Mum said you're special." Her words steadied him. To her, he wasn't a poor mechanic. He was simply the man who had cared enough to fix her dream. Inside, the mansion dazzled him. High ceilings adorned with chandeliers, walls lined with priceless paintings, and floors of smooth marble that gleamed like mirrors. He kept his hands tucked nervously into his pockets, afraid to touch anything. Victoria was waiting for them in a grand sitting room, her posture perfect as she sipped coffee from a porcelain cup. She rose as Jake entered, her expression softer than the one he had seen the day before. "Jake," she said warmly, "thank you for coming." He nodded politely, still unsure of the etiquette in a place where everything seemed unreal. Victoria gestured for him to sit, and though the velvet chair beneath him felt too rich for his clothes, he lowered himself carefully. For a moment, silence lingered, broken only by the ticking of an ornate clock. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I've thought a great deal about you since yesterday," she said. "I've met countless people in my life, business partners, investors, leaders, yet so few carry the kind of honesty I saw in you. You didn't fix Lily's car for money. You did it because it mattered to her. That kind of heart is something money can't buy." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasping together tightly. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I just did what anyone would have done." Victoria shook her head slowly, her eyes steady on him. "No, Jake, not anyone. Most people would have turned her away or charged her more than she could afford. But you, someone struggling yourself, gave freely. That tells me everything I need to know about you." She leaned forward, her tone firmer now. "That's why I'm offering you something, a chance to step out of survival and into something greater." Jake blinked, stunned by her words. "I want you to manage a luxury auto repair division for my company," she said clearly, her gaze unwavering. "It will be more than a job. It will be a chance to use your skills, your heart, and your integrity to build something extraordinary. People like you, honest, hard-working, are exactly what this world needs." Jake stared at her, struggling to process the enormity of what she had just said. A division for her company. Him? He shook his head slowly, his voice cracking. I'm just a small-town mechanic. I don't belong in a world like this." Victoria smiled faintly, almost knowingly. "I started as nothing too, Jake. People forget that. I know what it means to struggle, to wonder if tomorrow will even come. But what I also know is that character, not wealth, defines a person. And you, whether you see it or not, have something rare. You care. You give. That's the kind of leader I want on my team." Her words pierced through Jake's doubts like sunlight breaking through clouds. He looked at Lily, who watched him with wide, hopeful eyes, her hands clasped together as if she were silently praying. Tears welled in Jake's eyes, blurring his vision. For years he had fixed cars to survive, each repair a means to keep the lights on, to keep the doors open. He had never imagined that kindness, something so natural, so simple, could open a door like this. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want someone like me?" Victoria reached across the table, her hand steady. "I've never been more sure of anything. You gave my daughter something priceless. Let me give you something in return." The sincerity in her eyes silenced him. In that moment, Lily rolled closer and wrapped her arms around Jake tightly, her voice muffled against his chest. "You fixed my car," she whispered, "but you also fixed my heart." Jake's tears spilled freely now, his hand gently resting on her shoulder as he closed his eyes. He had spent so long believing he was invisible, forgotten by the world. Yet here was a child who saw him as a hero, and a woman who saw him as worthy of trust. For the first time in years, he felt like he mattered not just as a mechanic, but as a man. The rest of the afternoon blurred by in a haze of conversation and plans. Victoria introduced him to a team of advisors, showing him the resources that would be at his disposal. Contracts, designs, visions of a future he never dared to dream of, spread across the table. Jake listened in awe, still hardly believing this was his life. When he left the mansion that evening, Lily waving from the steps, he felt as though he were stepping out of one world and into another. The weight of poverty still lingered on his shoulders, but it was no longer chains, it was memory. From that day on, Jake's small-town garage became history. Within months, he was leading a division that specialized in luxury auto repairs. His name whispered in circles he once thought unreachable. But more than the success, more than the money, it was the bond with Lily and the gratitude in Victoria's eyes that fueled him. He hadn't just gained a career, he had found a family, a purpose, a future. And every night as he locked up his new shop, he remembered the simple truth that had started it all. One act of kindness can change a life forever.